You meet someone and the chemistry is instant. The conversation flows, the connection feels real, and for the first time in months or maybe years, you think this might actually work. 3 weeks later, she's pulling away. A month after that, you're alone again, replaying every conversation in your head, trying to figure out exactly where it went wrong. And here's the thing nobody wants to admit. If you're a man with ADHD, this isn't just bad luck. This is a pattern you've lived through so many times you've lost count. You're not imagining it. The rejection rate is real. The extended periods of being single are real. And there are specific neurological reasons why dating as an ADHD man is fundamentally different and significantly harder than what neurotypical men experience. But here's what nobody tells you about why this keeps happening and what's actually going on beneath the surface of these failed connections. Let's start with what happens in those first few weeks, because that's where the trap gets set. When you meet someone new and there's genuine interest, your ADHD brain does something remarkable. You hyperfocus. Suddenly, this person becomes the most interesting thing in your world. You're texting back immediately. You're planning creative dates. You're actually remembering to follow through on the little things she mentions. You're engaged, present, enthusiastic. And she notices. This version of you is attentive in ways that stand out. You're not playing games or being strategically unavailable. You're genuinely interested, and it shows. This is often when women report feeling like they've finally found someone who really sees them, who pays attention, who makes them feel special. And they're not wrong. In those early weeks, you are that person. The problem is that this level of attention is neurologically unsustainable for you, but neither of you knows that yet. She thinks this is your baseline. You might even think this is your baseline because when you're in it, hyperfocus feels like coming home to who you really are. Then something shifts. It might be a project deadline at work, a friend's crisis, a new video game that captures your interest, or sometimes nothing identifiable at all. Your attention regulates differently, and suddenly the hyperfocus fades. You're still interested in her, still care about her, but now you're forgetting to text back for hours. You're showing up 15 minutes late because you misjudged how long it would take to get ready. You're zoning out during conversations about her day. You're not deliberately pulling away, but from her perspective, that's exactly what's happening. The man who was intensely present and attentive has been replaced by someone who seems distracted, forgetful, and less invested. And here's the cruel part. You can feel it happening. You know you're dropping the ball, you genuinely want to do better, but your executive function isn't cooperating. You set reminders that you dismiss and forget. You make promises to yourself that you'll be more consistent, more present, more reliable, and then you miss her call because you got absorbed in something else, again. What she experiences is whiplash. The contrast between early you and current you feels like a bait and switch, even though nothing about your feelings has changed. She starts questioning whether you were ever really interested, or if the attention at the beginning was just a performance to get her hooked. She might voice her concerns, and when she does, you genuinely commit to doing better. And you do, for a few days, maybe a week. You hyperfocus again on being the attentive partner, proving to her and yourself that you do care. But this just creates a new pattern that's even more confusing for her. You're inconsistent. Sometimes incredibly present, sometimes seemingly checked out. From her perspective, this inconsistency reads as emotional unavailability or lack of genuine interest. She doesn't have the framework to understand that your attention regulation works differently, that your level of engagement isn't a reflection of your feelings for her. All she knows is that dating you feels unstable and unpredictable, and most people don't sign up for that long term. Then there's the way ADHD affects your communication patterns, and this is where things often fall apart completely. You interrupt. Not because you're rude or don't value what she's saying, but because your brain makes connections mid-conversation, and if you don't express them immediately, they'll vanish. You know this about yourself, so you jump in, and to you it feels like enthusiastic engagement. To her it feels like you're not really listening, like you're waiting for your turn to talk, rather than actually hearing her. She mentions something important coming up next week, and you forget. Not because you don't care, but because working memory challenges mean information doesn't always stick the way you need it to. She tells you something hurt her feelings, and you get defensive and start explaining your intentions, because rejection sensitivity has you reacting to perceived criticism before you can fully process what she's actually saying. None of this is intentional, but the impact is the same. She feels unheard, undervalued, and exhausted by having to constantly remind you of things she's already mentioned. The emotional regulation component creates its own set of problems that most ADHD men don't even realize are happening. Something goes wrong, she's upset about a situation that doesn't seem like a big deal to you, and you struggle to match her emotional intensity. You're trying to problem solve when she needs empathy. You're minimizing when she needs validation. Or it goes the other way. Something relatively minor happens, and your emotional response is disproportionate. You're frustrated in a way that seems excessive, or disappointed in a way that feels heavy and intense. She's walking on eggshells, not knowing which version of your emotional regulation she's going to encounter. And here's what makes this particularly damaging to relationships. Most women are socialized to be emotional caretakers. They're used to managing other people's feelings to some degree. But the emotional inconsistency that comes with ADHD isn't something most people know how to navigate. It's not standard moodiness. It's neurological volatility that even you can't always predict or control. Let's talk about what happens when conflict arises, because this is often the final breaking point. In any relationship, there will be disagreements and hurt feelings. When that happens with a neurotypical couple, there's usually a fairly standard pattern. Someone raises an issue, there's a discussion, maybe some tension, ideally some resolution or compromise. When you're an ADHD man in a relationship, conflict often follows a completely different trajectory. She brings up something that bothered her, something you did or didn't do, and your rejection sensitivity kicks in before your rational brain can engage. What she experiences as a simple request or boundary feels to you like fundamental criticism of who you are. Your nervous system reacts like you're under threat. You might shut down completely, going silent in a way that she experiences as stonewalling or passive aggression. Or you might flood, jumping immediately to defend yourself, over-explaining, bringing up past examples to prove your good intentions, getting emotionally activated in a way that completely derails the original conversation. Neither response actually addresses what she brought up, and now she's dealing with your big reaction instead of having her concern taken seriously. Even when you manage to stay regulated enough to hear her concern, the follow-through becomes its own problem. You genuinely agree to make changes. You absolutely intend to do better. You can visualize yourself being more attentive, more reliable, more present. But intention and execution are two different things, and executive function challenges mean the gap between them is often enormous. You forget the specific things she asked you to remember. You get distracted at the exact moment you were supposed to follow through. Time blindness means you show up late even though you promised you wouldn't, and each time this happens, each time your actions don't match your words, her trust erodes a little more. She starts to believe that you don't actually care enough to change, that your promises are empty, that this is just who you are and she needs to either accept it or leave. And the painful truth is that from the outside, that's a reasonable conclusion. She can't see your internal experience. She can't see how much you genuinely want to do better, how frustrated you are with yourself, how the gap between your intentions and your actions torments you. The timeline of ADHD relationships often follows a predictable pattern, and once you recognize it, you'll see it in your own history. Intense beginning lasting anywhere from 3 weeks to 3 months, where everything feels electric and possible. Then the hyperfocus fades and issues start emerging. She begins expressing concerns about your attention, your reliability, your follow-through. You try harder for a while, creating a brief resurgence that gives her hope things can improve. But the underlying patterns don't change because they're neurological, not behavioral choices. More concerns arise, conflicts become more frequent. She starts to withdraw emotionally, protecting herself from continued disappointment. You notice the withdrawal and it triggers your rejection sensitivity, making you either chase harder or pull away defensively. Eventually, she ends it, citing incompatibility or feeling like she can't rely on you or needing someone more emotionally available. And you're left confused because you genuinely cared, you really tried, and still it wasn't enough. If this resonates with you, if you're seeing your own relationship history in this pattern, hit that subscribe button because we're going deeper into why this keeps happening and what's really at stake here. After the breakup, the extended single period begins, and this has its own neurological components that most people don't understand. The rejection you just experienced isn't processed the same way in your brain as it would be for someone without ADHD. Research shows that ADHD brains process rejection more intensely and for longer periods. What might take someone else a few weeks to emotionally move past can linger for you for months. And during that time, your executive function often takes a hit. The motivation to put yourself out there again, to download the dating apps, to respond to messages, to plan dates, all of that requires sustained effort and follow through precisely when your brain is least capable of providing it. So you withdraw. You tell yourself you need time to heal, which is partially true, but what's also true is that the executive load of dating feels overwhelming when you're already struggling to manage basic life tasks. When you do eventually try again, you're carrying something heavy that makes the next attempt even harder. You're hyper-aware now of your patterns. You know you have a tendency to hyperfocus early and then become inconsistent. You know you struggle with follow-through. You know your emotional regulation can be unpredictable. This awareness doesn't fix the problems, but it does add a layer of anxiety to new connections. You're watching yourself, critiquing yourself, tensing up every time you forget to respond to a text quickly enough or space out during a conversation. This self-consciousness actually makes your ADHD symptoms worse, because anxiety and ADHD feed into each other. The more anxious you are about messing up, the more your executive function struggles. The more your executive function struggles, the more mistakes you make. The more mistakes you make, the more anxious you become. It's a cycle that's incredibly difficult to break, and it makes forming new connections feel like navigating a minefield, where you're both the person walking through it and the one who laid the mines. Here's something most ADHD men don't realize about why the rejection rate is higher for them specifically. Women are often socialized to value emotional attunement, consistent communication, and reliability. These are the exact areas where ADHD creates the most challenges. It's not that these women are wrong for having these values or that their standards are too high. It's that there's a fundamental mismatch between what's neurologically natural for you and what's culturally expected in dating and relationships. A woman might be perfectly understanding about physical differences or career challenges or family complications. But when she feels like you're not really listening to her, not remembering things that matter to her, not following through on plans or promises, that hits at the core of how she evaluates whether someone actually cares about her. And the devastating part is that you do care. Your feelings are real, your intentions are genuine, but intentions are invisible. And what she can see are the behaviors that result from your executive function challenges. The extended single periods also happen because ADHD men often have a narrower range of potential compatible partners than neurotypical men. You need someone who can understand that your attention patterns aren't a reflection of your feelings. Someone who won't take it personally when you forget something important. Someone who can handle emotional intensity without becoming dysregulated themselves. Someone patient enough to work with your need for external structure and reminders. Someone secure enough not to interpret your inconsistency as lack of interest. That's a specific profile, and it's not the majority of people in the dating pool. So even when you're actively looking, even when you're trying, the percentage of people you could actually build something sustainable with is smaller from the start. And you don't usually know this about someone in the first few dates. It takes time for these compatibility factors to reveal themselves. which means you're investing emotional energy into connections that may be doomed from the beginning, not because either person is flawed, but because the neurological fit isn't there. Let's address something that might be uncomfortable to hear but needs to be said. The longer you're single, the more that history becomes its own obstacle. When you're in your early 20s and you've been single for a year, that's normal. When you're in your 30s and you haven't had a relationship last more than a few months in 5 years, potential partners start asking questions. They wonder what's wrong, why no one else wanted to commit to you, whether there are red flags they're not seeing yet. And you can't exactly explain in early dating that your ADHD creates specific relationship challenges without sounding like you're making excuses or labeling yourself before they've even gotten to know you. So you either hide your history, which feels dishonest, or you're upfront about it, which sometimes triggers their concerns even more. The extended single periods become self-perpetuating because they create a narrative that works against you, even when the actual reason for those periods is neurological rather than personal dysfunction. Dating apps are particularly brutal for ADHD men, and understanding why reveals a lot about how these extended single periods develop. Apps require consistent engagement. You need to check them regularly, respond to matches within a reasonable time frame, maintain multiple conversations simultaneously, remember details about different people, follow through on transitioning from app to real-life interaction. Every single one of these steps is an executive function demand. And when you're already managing work, household tasks, social obligations, and basic self-care, the cognitive load of also maintaining dating app presence often gets sacrificed. You download the app with good intentions, you might even get some matches, but then messages sit unread for days because you opened the app, got distracted by something else, and forgot to go back. Or you respond enthusiastically to someone, they write back, and by the time you see their response 3 days later, they've already written you off as not interested. The format is designed for neurotypical attention patterns, and if yours work differently, you're operating at a structural disadvantage before you even get to an actual date. When you do make it to dates, there's another layer of challenge that contributes to the rejection pattern. First dates require executive function at every stage. Planning where to meet, what time, how to get there, what to wear. Then the date itself requires sustained attention, active listening, appropriate response timing, reading social cues, regulating your enthusiasm so you don't dominate the conversation, but also contributing enough so you don't seem disinterested. For someone with ADHD, this is neurologically exhausting. You might do well on the first date because you can rally your resources for a couple hours, but she suggests meeting again in 3 days, and in that time you need to maintain text communication, follow through on any plans you discussed, and show up for the second date with the same level of engagement. If your executive function is depleted from work stress or life demands, you might flake, forget to confirm plans, or show up physically but be mentally checked out. She experiences this as lack of interest or flakiness. You experience it as your brain not cooperating, despite your genuine desire to be there. The intersection of ADHD and masculinity expectations creates its own unique pressures that intensify rejection patterns. Men are socially conditioned to be providers, protectors, initiators, leaders. They're expected to have their lives together, to be decisive, to follow through on their word. ADHD directly interferes with all of these expectations. You might have great ideas and intentions but struggle with execution. You might be intelligent and capable but have a messy apartment and forgotten bills. You might be emotionally deep and caring, but struggle to express it consistently. The gap between the masculine ideal and your lived reality creates shame, and that shame often manifests in dating as either overcompensation or withdrawal. You might try to be overly perfect early on, hiding your struggles, which just sets up bigger disappointment later when the reality emerges. Or you might avoid dating altogether because you're convinced you're not together enough to be what someone needs. If you've experienced this cycle, if you're recognizing yourself in these patterns, drop a comment below about which part hits hardest for you, because this conversation matters. Let's talk about what happens in the extended single periods beyond just the absence of romantic connection, because the impact goes deeper than loneliness. When you're repeatedly rejected after putting yourself out there, when relationships keep failing despite your genuine effort, your sense of self-worth takes a systematic beating. You start to internalize the message that you're too much or not enough, that your natural way of being in the world is fundamentally incompatible with being loved. And here's where it gets particularly dark for ADHD men. Your brain is already wired to be more sensitive to rejection. That's not metaphorical or psychological. There's actual neurological research showing that ADHD brains process social rejection with greater intensity and duration than neurotypical brains. So every failed relationship, every fade out, every conversation about how you're not meeting expectations hits you harder and lingers longer than it would for someone else. The extended single periods aren't just about circumstance or bad luck. They're often about needing more recovery time because the neurological impact of rejection is more severe for you. During these extended single periods, something else happens that nobody talks about. You start to lose faith in your own judgment. You thought the last relationship was good. You felt the connection. You believed you were being a good partner. And then she told you all the ways you weren't, all the things you did wrong that you didn't even realize were problems. So now when you meet someone new, you don't trust your own read on the situation. Is the connection real, or are you hyper-focusing and misreading it again? When she seems happy, is she actually happy, or is she just being polite before she eventually tells you about all the ways you've been falling short that you didn't notice? This self-doubt makes you hesitant when you should be engaged, overthinking when you should be present, and women can sense that hesitation. It reads as lack of confidence or ambivalence, which makes them less likely to invest, which means even when you're trying to do better, your attempt to avoid past mistakes creates new problems. The working memory component of ADHD creates a specific relationship challenge that leads to a particular kind of rejection. She tells you about her day, about the difficult conversation with her mother, about the project stress at work, about her friend's wedding next month. You're listening in the moment. You care about what she's saying. But working memory challenges mean that information doesn't transfer into long-term storage the way it needs to. 3 days later, she references the thing with her mother, and you have no idea what she's talking about. She's hurt because from her perspective, if you cared, you'd remember. She's told you about this friendship, this interest, this concern multiple times, and you keep forgetting. What she doesn't understand is that for you, each time feels like the first time you're hearing it. There's no emotional continuity because the memories didn't form properly. This looks exactly like not caring, even though the actual problem is neurological encoding. And try explaining that to someone who's hurt that you forgot something important to them. It sounds like an excuse, like you're trying to avoid accountability, even when it's a straightforward description of how your memory actually works. Time blindness contributes to relationship failure in ways that are hard to overstate. You say you'll text her later, and to you that feels like it could be an hour or could be 5 hours because time doesn't track the same way in your brain. To her, later means within a reasonable time frame, probably within an hour or two. When you text 5 hours later, she's already decided you're not that interested. You make plans for 7 p.m. and in your head you need to leave by 6:30 to get there on time. But you don't start getting ready until 6:20 because time compression means you genuinely believe you can shower, dress, and drive there in 40 minutes. You show up 15 minutes late, again, and her patience is wearing thin. You promise you'll complete something by Friday, and Friday arrives and you're genuinely surprised because in your internal timeline, Friday was still several days away. She needed you to follow through. She was counting on you, and now she's let down. Each individual instance might be forgivable, but the pattern of time-related unreliability becomes evidence that you can't be counted on, that you don't respect her time, that you're not serious about the relationship. The way ADHD affects prioritization creates another relationship dynamic that often ends in rejection. Your brain doesn't prioritize the way neurotypical brains do. Urgency drives your attention more than importance. So you might forget to do something your partner needed because it wasn't urgent in the moment, but you spent 3 hours researching something related to your current interest. To you, these aren't connected. You're not choosing the interest over her. Your brain grabbed onto what was stimulating and immediate, and the task for her fell into the category of things you intend to do, but that don't have immediate consequences if delayed. To her, this looks like you prioritizing your wants over her needs, like she ranks lower in your life than whatever currently has your attention. She doesn't have access to your internal experience where you're not making conscious priority decisions. You're just responding to what your brain flags as demanding attention right now. Let's talk about the recovery time between relationships and why it's often longer for ADHD men. Neurotypical people can usually process a breakup and be ready to date again within a few months. For ADHD men, the timeline is often significantly longer, sometimes a year or more, and there are specific reasons why. First, your emotional regulation challenges mean the grief and rejection hit harder and last longer. You're not being dramatic or wallowing. Your nervous system is genuinely taking longer to return to baseline. Second, breakups often destabilize other areas of your life. If your partner was providing external structure, reminders, emotional regulation support, their absence leaves a gap that affects your functioning across the board. Your apartment gets messier. You forget appointments, your sleep schedule falls apart. You're not just recovering from heartbreak, you're trying to reconstruct the scaffolding that was helping you function. Third, the pattern recognition your ADHD brain is good at means you're very aware that this has happened before, that your ADHD played a role, that it's likely to happen again. That awareness creates a reluctance to jump back into dating because you know the odds, you've lived the statistics, and facing another round feels daunting. During these extended single periods, well-meaning people often offer advice that completely misses the neurological reality. They tell you to just try harder, to set reminders, to be more present, to think before you speak, as if you haven't thought of all of that. As if you haven't tried every app, every system, every organizational strategy. What they don't understand is that ADHD isn't a motivation problem or a laziness problem. It's an executive function problem. You can know exactly what you should do, genuinely want to do it, set up systems to help you do it, and still not do it because the neurological wiring that translates intention into action is impaired. When this happens repeatedly in relationships, when you keep disappointing partners despite your genuine efforts, the shame compounds. You start to believe you're the problem in an unfixable way, that you're broken, that you're destined to be alone because you can't be what anyone needs. The special interest component of ADHD creates relationship challenges that often surprise ADHD men because it feels like you're being authentically yourself, but it gets interpreted very differently by partners. When you find something fascinating, your brain wants to explore it completely. You want to talk about it, research it, share your discoveries. This enthusiasm is part of who you are. But in relationships, this can create situations where you're monologuing about your interest, while your partner is trying to connect with you about her day, her feelings, her life. You're not trying to be self-centered. Your brain is doing what ADHD brains do, diving deep into what's captured your attention. But she's experiencing it as you being more interested in the topic than in her. And when she tries to redirect conversation to other subjects, you might seem deflated or disengaged because your brain was fully activated by the special interest and now has to switch gears, which ADHD brains do poorly. The relationship starts to feel one-sided to her, like she's always accommodating your interests while you don't show equal curiosity about hers. The masking that many ADHD men do, especially if they were late diagnosed or are undiagnosed, creates its own relationship destruction pattern. You've learned to hide your struggles, to compensate, to appear more together than you feel. Early in relationships, you can maintain this mask because hyperfocus gives you the energy for it. You're carefully managing what you say, how you act, suppressing your impulses, forcing your attention to stay engaged. She's falling for the masked version of you. But masking is exhausting, and it's not sustainable long-term. Eventually, the real you starts showing through. You're more distracted, more forgetful, more emotionally variable, more impulsive. She feels betrayed, like you misrepresented yourself, like the person she started dating has been replaced by someone else. You feel exhausted and resentful because you've been working so hard to be acceptable, and it still wasn't enough. The relationship often ends with both people feeling deceived, even though neither person was deliberately dishonest. You were just trying to survive in a neurotypical world, and she was responding to the person you presented. The rejection sensitivity that comes with ADHD deserves its own deep examination, because it's often the psychological factor that deals the final blow to relationships. Rejection sensitivity dysphoria is common in ADHD, though it's not listed in diagnostic criteria. It means you experience rejection, criticism, or failure with intense emotional pain, often disproportionate to the situation. In relationships, this manifests in painful ways. Your partner makes a mild criticism about something you forgot, and your nervous system reacts like you're being fundamentally rejected. You become defensive or shut down completely, which prevents you from actually hearing the concern and addressing it. Or you're so afraid of potential rejection that you start sabotaging the relationship preemptively. You pull away first so she can't leave you. You pick fights because conflict feels more controllable than vulnerability. You interpret neutral or ambiguous situations as rejection and respond to threats that aren't actually there. She's confused because your reactions don't match what's actually happening. She said she needed some alone time tonight, and you heard that she's done with the relationship. She asked you to be on time tomorrow, and you felt the crushing weight of being inadequate. These distortions push partners away because they can't win. Everything they say or do gets filtered through your rejection sensitivity and comes out the other side as evidence that you're not good enough. Here's the reality that's hard to face. The combination of executive function challenges, emotional regulation difficulties, time blindness, working memory problems, attention regulation differences, and rejection sensitivity creates a perfect storm that makes traditional relationship dynamics genuinely difficult for ADHD men. It's not impossible. Plenty of ADHD men have successful relationships, but it requires either finding a partner who has the specific combination of patience, understanding, security, and flexibility to work with these challenges, or it requires getting to a point where you've developed enough awareness, systems, and possibly medication or therapy support to manage the symptoms better. Neither of these is easy to achieve, and neither happens quickly. So the extended single periods aren't character flaws or bad luck. They're the natural consequence of a neurological mismatch between how you're wired and what conventional relationship dynamics require, combined with the recovery time needed after the emotional impact of repeated rejections. The cruel irony is that ADHD men often have qualities that should make them excellent partners. You're often creative, passionate, empathetic, interesting, capable of deep focus when something captures you, full of ideas and energy. In the right circumstances with the right person, you can be incredibly attentive and engaged. But these strengths get overshadowed by the challenges, especially in the evaluation phase of early dating when follow-through and consistency matter most. By the time someone gets to know you well enough to appreciate your strengths, they've often already decided that the challenges are deal breakers. You don't get the chance to show what you're capable of in a stable, understanding relationship, because you can't get to that point without first navigating the early stages where your ADHD is most likely to cause problems. What makes this even more complicated is that awareness of your ADHD doesn't necessarily fix the problems. You can understand exactly why you interrupt, why you forget, why you're late, why your attention wanders. You can explain it to partners. But understanding doesn't change the neurological reality. She still experiences the impact of your symptoms regardless of the explanation. And honestly, many women don't want to sign up for a relationship where they have to constantly accommodate neurological differences, where they need to be understanding about being repeatedly disappointed, where they have to parent their partner with reminders and systems. That's not what most people envision when they think about romantic partnership. They want an equal, someone who can hold up their end without constant support. And while that's a reasonable thing to want, it doesn't change the fact that for ADHD men, being that person requires significantly more effort and external support than it does for neurotypical men. The extended single periods also happen because after multiple relationship failures, many ADHD men start to question whether they should even be trying. You start wondering if it's fair to pursue relationships when you know your ADHD is going to create challenges. You worry that you're setting partners up for disappointment, that you're going to hurt people who deserve better. This isn't low self-esteem talking. It's pattern recognition based on lived experience. You've seen how this story ends. You've felt the moment when someone who cared about you decides you're not worth the effort anymore, and making the conscious choice to avoid inflicting that on someone else, while also protecting yourself from more rejection, leads to withdrawal from dating entirely. You convince yourself you're better off alone, that you'll wait until you have your life more together, until you're more stable, more functional, more worthy. But that day keeps getting pushed further out, because the executive function challenges that affect relationships also affect every other area of life. You're waiting to be good enough, but the metric for good enough keeps moving because the challenges are neurological, not situational. Let's address the medication and therapy question because it's relevant here. Can treatment help? Sometimes significantly. Stimulant medication can improve executive function, attention regulation, impulse control. Therapy can help with rejection sensitivity, relationship skills, shame. But getting diagnosed and treated is itself an executive function challenge. You need to recognize you need help, research providers, make appointments, show up consistently, follow through on treatment recommendations. Many ADHD men are stuck in a catch-22, where they need treatment to function well enough to get treatment. And even when you do get help, medication isn't a magic fix. It doesn't change your neurological wiring. It helps you access your executive functions more reliably. But you still have to build the skills, develop the awareness, create the systems. That process takes time, often years. So the extended single periods continue not because you're not trying to address the problems, but because addressing them is a long process that has to happen before you're ready to date successfully. The impact of repeated rejection and extended singleness on ADHD men's mental health is something that deserves serious attention. You're statistically more likely to experience depression and anxiety than the general population already. Add in repeated relationship failures, extended isolation, and the shame of feeling fundamentally unlovable, and you have a recipe for serious psychological distress. Some ADHD men in extended single periods develop avoidant patterns where they convince themselves they don't need relationships, that they're better off alone. Others become increasingly desperate, pursuing any connection regardless of compatibility because loneliness has become unbearable. Neither pattern leads to healthy relationships. The mental health impact creates its own barrier to forming connections because you're trying to date from a place of depletion rather than stability. The truth is that being an ADHD man in the modern dating world means navigating a system that wasn't designed for how your brain works. The timeline expectations, the communication patterns, the reliability requirements, the emotional consistency demands, all of it assumes a neurotypical baseline. When you don't meet that baseline, not because you don't care, but because you're neurologically different, you get filtered out. You get rejected. You end up single for extended periods while you try to figure out what's wrong with you, why you can't make it work, why everyone else seems to manage relationships while you keep failing. And the answer isn't that you're broken or inadequate. The answer is that there's a fundamental compatibility issue between ADHD neurology and conventional relationship expectations, and until that's recognized and accommodated by potential partners or managed through treatment and support, the pattern Continues. Understanding all of this doesn't immediately fix anything, but it does offer something important: context. When you know why the pattern keeps repeating, you can stop blaming yourself for character flaws you don't have. You can stop believing you're unlovable when the reality is you're neurologically different in ways that create specific challenges. You can start making more informed decisions about dating, about when you're ready, about what kind of partner might actually be compatible with how your brain works. You can seek treatment not from a place of shame, but from a place of wanting to function better in all areas of life. And maybe most importantly, you can extend yourself some compassion for struggling with something that is genuinely difficult, that isn't just a matter of trying harder or caring more. The rejection you've experienced, the extended time you've spent single, these aren't reflections of your worth. They're reflections of a mismatch between your neurology and relationship norms. And that's a completely different thing. Recognizing that difference might not change your current circumstances immediately, but it changes how you understand them, and that understanding is the first step towards something better.